I'll let you take the lead in that.
Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Fiber Research. And I'm going to start off with presenting the nuts and bolts of our randomized clinical trial protocol that we are currently running in Alaska and Anchorage. The title is Dietary Fiber to Reduce Colon Cancer Risk in Alaska Native People, the Alaska Fiber Intervention Research Study. And just a short background, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because Dr. O'Keefe gave such a wonderful presentation on a lot of this stuff that I have in my background. So this chart is from the Alaska Native Cancer 50-year report from the Alaska Native Tumor Registry. And I just want to point out in this top 10 sites chart of cancer incidence that colorectal cancer ranks second among Alaska Native people in this 5-year averaged annual age-adjusted presentation. And this is age-adjusted by incidence rate per 100,000. And it also shows the difference between Alaska Native people and US white people and how much more incidence, the higher the incidence is in the Alaska Native people. So colorectal cancer is the third most common cancer in the US, and rates of new cases are increasing in adults that are younger than 55 years old. And this was brought to the forefront when Chadwick Boseman, who was the star in the Black Panther, died of colorectal cancer. And so there's a lot more focus on curing and preventing colorectal cancer. So Alaska Native people have the highest rate in the world. They have a higher average annual age-adjusted colorectal cancer incidence rate than US whites, 87.6 versus 36.7 per 100,000 people. The rates of death from colorectal cancer increase with age. It's, of course, on the previous slide, we showed that it was the second leading cause of cancer deaths in Alaska. And Alaska Native people have higher colorectal cancer mortality rates than the US whites, 37.4 versus 13.4 per 100,000 people. So our study focuses on diet and introduction of increased fiber to your diet. And as the old adage says, you are what you eat. And it's very important to have a balanced diet. So you want to balance your proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, because if like you raise your fats too high, then it's bad for your health. But if you moderate it and balance it, because fats are essential to well-being. So it's just a matter of balance. And carbohydrates here, I sort of focus on because we are administering a complex carbohydrate resistant starch as our intervention. So there's two types of carbs. There's digestible and indigestible. And the digestibles are made up of simple and complex, simple being sugars such as dextrose, sucrose, fructose, lactose, complex as starches. And indigestible is fiber. So, and also Dr. O'Keefe spoke a lot about the Western diet, which this cartoon shows. Western diet is, of course, convenience, fast food. And so it's high in fat, low in fiber, high in sugar. You have a nice sugary drink to top off your high fat meal. So, and Americans are trying to change their food and what they eat. So let's talk a little bit about dietary fiber, because all fiber is not created equal. We have soluble fibers, which you find in grains, vegetables, fruits in different proportions. And you also have insoluble fibers, and those are also found in fruits and vegetables, whole grains, pastas. So the difference between the two is soluble is, of course, you can dissolve it in water and it may form a gel, whereas insoluble does not dissolve in water. So yes, there's many health benefits to fiber. And one of the top ones is your cardiovascular system. And the American Health Heart Association recommends that adult women have an intake of fiber of 20 to 25 grams, and adult males 31 to 38 grams of fiber per day. So, and also, as Dr. O'Keefe talked about in the plenary lecture, we have higher levels of 50 grams per day or more in order to help prevent cancer risk and to produce those beneficial metabolites and moderate our microbiome so that we have a good diversity of good microbiota. So as I alluded to before, we are giving resistant starch as our intervention, and resistant starch is a complex carbohydrate, and it's similar to insoluble fiber. It's not digestible, so it does not break down into sugars, and it's not absorbed in the intestine. And there are 5 categories of resistant starch. And in our study, we're using RS2, which is a starch from naturally resistant starchy foods, such as uncooked potatoes, green banana flour, and high amylose corn flour, which is what we're using in our study. And the one I find interesting, just as a side, is the RS3. So what you're doing is you're taking starchy foods, cooking them, and then cooling them, and you're producing a retrograded starch. And that can be done in potatoes, pasta, and rice. My chemistry coming out. And so just a brief overview of the human microbiota. Dr. O'Keefe gave a beautiful presentation on the microbiome in his talk. So there's trillions of microorganisms that make up our human microbiota. And the stunning part to me is that the ratio of bacterial genes to human genes is 360 to 1. So our bodies are mainly bacteria. So the gut microbiota aids in digestion, and it can impact the immune response, and it promotes or prevents pathogens. And so we're actually, in that vein, more interested in what our diet and how it can impact COVID-19 infections, for instance. And also it has an effect on your overall health and well-being. As I said before, fiber is good for your cardiovascular system, your digestive system, but it also is good for your mental well-being as well. So like I said, it's good for your overall health. And so what can impact your microbiota is environment, especially your diet, which impacts your gut microbial community. And this figure that I got from the website, The Human Microbiome, What is Biotechnology, shows areas where you have a microbiome. And I think the biggest area is your skin, because you have microbes all over your skin. And then the next place is in your gut. And the gut makes up a large portion of the human microbiome. And then there's other areas too, the oral microbiome, and also in the lungs you have a microbiome as well. So to start off with our fiber study, it's funded by the National Cancer Institute, and it was funded in 2016. We also registered it with clinicaltrials.gov. And the main sites where the study takes place, and actually I have this in the wrong order, the main area is in Alaska, and that's where we're doing all of our recruitment. And we have the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium research staff doing all the work up in Alaska to coordinate this whole project. And also, of course, the Alaska Native Medical Center, surgery service and clinic, the day surgery laboratories and other clinics in the medical center. And lastly, the University of Pittsburgh, where we receive the samples and we coordinate all of the analyses of the samples. We started recruiting in November of 2017 after we had received all of the approvals we needed from the IRB, and we wrote an extensive manual of operating procedures. So what are our study aims? Well, the main aim is to determine if higher fiber intake can induce clinically meaningful suppression of proliferative and inflammatory colonic biomarkers of cancer risk. And in a nutshell, that means, we want to be able to see if we can lower the markers that we measure for risk of colon cancer. And by clinically meaningful suppression, we mean greater than 20% decrease in these inflammatory and proliferative markers. And secondly, we want to investigate our hypothesis that the high risk of colon cancer in Alaska Native people is a consequence of insufficient fiber in their diet, leading to butyrate deficiency, which is one of our primary metabolites that we're monitoring. So the inclusion criteria for our study is participants must be of the Alaska Native race, age 40 to 75 years, and that's the age range for colonoscopy in Alaska. BMI of 18 to 40, and living within the South Central area, which is the Anchorage area, and also scheduling their colonoscopies at the Alaska Native Medical Center. Exclusion criteria is any family history of familial polyposis, Lynch syndrome, any kind of hereditary non-polyposis, colorectal cancer. If you've been diagnosed with IBD or colon cancer, any personal history of kidney or liver diseases, including bleeding disorder, any previous GI surgeries that may have disturbed your gut function, any chronic GI disease that also may have disturbed gut function. If you've been on any antibiotic treatment within the past 12 weeks, because that will disrupt your microbiome. And if you're being treated with steroids, that also can disrupt microbiome. And also if you've been prescribed for any diabetes medications. So this slide shows the study from start to finish. And so we start with enrollment, and it has to be individuals meeting all of our inclusion criteria and exclusion, not having any of those exclusion criteria. So you start off with your colonoscopy, where we will collect all of these samples listed here, including biopsies, stool sample, blood, urine. You perform a food frequency questionnaire and 24-hour diet recall, and we monitor height and weight. And we also collect a breath sample to analyze breath gases that are a sign of fermentation in your gut. And then after your colonoscopy, you have an 8 weeks stabilization period. And then you are randomized into either of two groups, the intervention group that receives the resistant starch or the group that receives digestible starch. We have a total of 60 participants that we're trying to reach, so that we can reach our power, so that we know we can, produce data that's significant. So after you've been randomized into your group, then you start your supplement. And of course, before the supplement, we collect samples. We always collect samples. So we need a baseline stool sample, and we also collect a saliva sample. And then every week through the 4 weeks of supplement, we collect stool. We measure height and weight. We aren't doing the breath test anymore because we are observing the participants by direct observation, either in person or on an app on their phone or computer. So we're watching to make sure that participants take their complete supplement. And then we're also monitoring bowel function and diet intake every day so that we can monitor tolerance of the supplement. And then at the end, you reach that long end, we do the final flex sigmoidoscopy, where we collect biopsies again. We use a flex sigmoidoscopy because it's less invasive. And so we're taking samples from the sigmoidoscopy versus at colonoscopy, we can go to the proximal colon. And we collect all the same samples that we're collecting at colonoscopy. So in a nutshell, that's the entire phase of the supplement and study. So
I have a couple more slides for your presentation.
Okay, good, I'm almost done. So we're still enrolling participants, so you'll still see all of our beautiful flyers up in the medical center. And our current enrollment is, we have enrolled 64 total. We've lost 20 to follow-up or withdrawal. Some of the follow-ups were lost during the COVID pandemic. So we currently have 44 active enrolled, of which 39 have completed the entire study. And these are some measured outcomes that we are measuring the samples, all of the samples that we collected. And I'm just going to skip to our targeted samples. So we're analyzing targeted metabolites and microbial genes, and Loy Eberhard is going to address those in his presentation. And also, we're doing global analyses, and these are being performed microbiome at the University of Pittsburgh, and the global metabolomics are being performed at Imperial College. And of course, I want to acknowledge all of these groups who, without this project, could never get done. We greatly appreciate everybody's hard work and the NIH for their support in this very important project. And thank you. My favorite picture of Denali.
Thank you, Annette. If you guys have any questions, you can put those in the Q&A chat, and then at the end of the presentations, we'll go through questions.